The Knights of the Cross by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Thank you for your support and every positive reaction. Chapter 4. Princess Danuta, Mako, and Zbyszko had been in Tyniec before, but in the train of attendants there were some courtiers who now saw it for the first time. These greatly admired the magnificent abbey, which was surrounded by high walls built over the rocks and precipices, and stood on a lofty mountain, now shining in the golden rays of the rising sun. The stately walls and the buildings devoted to various purposes, the gardens situated at the foot of the mountain, and the carefully cultivated fields showed immediately the great wealth of the abbey. The people from poor Mazowsza were amazed. It is true there were other mighty Benedictine abbeys in other parts of the country, as for instance in Lubusz on Odra, in Plock, in Wielkopolska, in Mogila, and in several other places, but none of them could compare with the abbey in Tyniec, which was richer than many principalities, and had an income greater than even the kings of those times possessed. Therefore, the astonishment increased among the courtiers, and some of them could scarcely believe their own eyes. In the meanwhile, the princess, wishing to make the journey pleasant and to interest the young ladies, begged one of the monks to relate the awful story about Walgier's Dolly, which had been told to her in Krakow, although not very correctly. Hearing this, the ladies surrounded the princess and walked slowly, looking in the rays of the sun like moving flowers. "Let Brother Hedolf tell about Walgiers, who appeared to him on a certain night," said one of the monks, looking at one of the other monks who was an old man. "Pious father, have you seen him with your own eyes?" asked the princess. "I have seen him," answered the monk gloomily. "There are certain moments during which, by God's will, he is permitted to leave the underground regions of hell and show himself to the world." "When does it happen?" The old monk looked at the other monks and became silent. There was a tradition that the ghost of Walgiers appeared when the morals of the monastic lives became corrupted, and when the monks thought more about worldly riches and pleasures than was right. None of them, however, wished to tell this, but it was also said that the ghost's appearance portended war or some other calamity. Brother Hedolf, after a short silence, said, "His appearance does not foretell any good fortune." "I would not care to see him," said the princess, making the sign of the cross. "But why is he in hell, if it is true, as I heard, that he only avenged a wrong?" "Had he been virtuous during his whole life," said the monk sternly, "he would be damned just the same because he was a heathen, and original sin was not washed out by baptism." After those words the princess's brows contracted painfully, because she recollected that her father, whom she loved dearly, had died in the heathen's errors also. "We are listening," said she after a short silence. Brother Hedolf began thus. "During the time of heathenism there was a mighty Grabia, whose name was Walgiers, whom on account of his great beauty they called Dali. This whole country, as far as one can see, belonged to him, and he led all the expeditions, the people on foot and 100 spearmen who were all Laudikas. The men to the east as far as Opola, and to the west as far as Sandomierz were his vassals. Nobody was able to count his herds, and in Tyniec he had a tower full of money, the same as the Knights of the Cross have now in Marienburg." "Yes, they have, I know it," interrupted the princess. "He was a giant," continued the monk. "He was so strong he could dig up an oak tree by the roots, and nobody in the whole world could compare with him for beauty, playing on the lute or singing. One time when he was at the court of a French king, the king's daughter, Helgunda, fell in love with him, and ran away with him to Tyniec, where they lived together in sin. No priest would marry them with Christian rites, because Helgunda's father had promised her to the cloister for the glory of God. At the same time, there lived in Wislica, Wisław Piękny, who belonged to King Popiel's family. He, while Walgiers Dali was absent, devastated the county around Tyniec. Walgiers, when he returned, overpowered Wisław and imprisoned him in Tyniec. He did not take into consideration this fact, that every woman, as soon as she saw Wisław, was ready immediately to leave father, mother, and even husband, if she could only satisfy her passion. This happened to Helgunda. She immediately devised such fetters for Walgiers that giant, although he could pluck an oak up by its roots, was unable to break them. She gave him to Wisław, who took and imprisoned him in Wislica. There Ringa, Wislaw's sister, having heard Walgir singing in his underground cell, soon fell in love with him and set him at liberty. He then killed Wislaw and Helgunda with the sword, left their bodies for the crows, and returned to Tyniec with Ringa. "Was it not right, what he did?" asked the princess. Brother Hedolf answered, "Had he received baptism and given Tyniec to the Benedictines, perhaps God would have forgiven his sins, but he did not do this, therefore the earth has devoured him." "Were the Benedictines in this kingdom at that time?" "No, the Benedictines were not here. Only the heathen lived here then." "How then could he receive baptism, or give up Tyniec?" "He could not, and that is exactly why he was sent to hell to endure eternal torture," answered the monk with authority. "Sure, he speaks rightly," several voices were heard to say. In the meanwhile, they approached the principal gate of the monastery, where the abbot with numerous monks and noblemen was awaiting the princess. There were always many lay people in the cloister, land stewards, barristers, and procurators. Many noblemen, even powerful wladykas, held in fief from the monastery numerous estates, and these, as vassals, were glad to pass their time at the court of their suzerain, where near the main altar it was easy to obtain some gift and many benefits. Therefore the abbas centum valarum could greet the princess with a numerous retinue. He was a man of great stature, with a thin, intelligent face. His head was shaved on the top, with a fringe of gray hair beneath. He had a deep scar on his forehead, which he had evidently received during his youth when he performed knightly deeds. His eyes looked penetratingly from beneath dark eyebrows. He wore a monk's dress, similar to that worn by the other monks, but over it he wore a black mantle, lined with purple. Around his neck was a gold chain, from which was hanging a gold cross set with precious stones. His whole figure betrayed a proud man, accustomed to command, and one who had confidence in himself. But he greeted the princess affably and even humbly, because he remembered that her husband belonged to the family of the princes of Mazovsha, from which came the kings, Ladislav and Kazimierz, and that her mother was the reigning queen of one of the most powerful kingdoms in the world. Therefore he passed the threshold of the gate, bowed low, and then having made the sign of the cross over Anna Danuta and over her court, he said, "Welcome, gracious lady, to the threshold of this poor monastery. Saint Benedictus of Nursia, Saint Maurice, Saint Bonifacius, Saint Benedictus of Anion, and also Gian of Ptolemaea, our patrons living in eternal glory, give you health and happiness, and bless you 7 times a day during the remainder of your life." "They would be deaf if they did not hear the words of such a great abbot," said the princess affably. "We came here to hear Mass, during which we will place ourselves under their protection." Having said this, she stretched her hand toward him, which he, falling upon one knee, kissed in knightly manner. Then they passed through the gate. The monks were waiting to celebrate Mass, because immediately the bells were rung. The trumpeters blew near the church door in honor of the princess. Every church used to make a great impression on the princess who had not been born in a Christian country. The church in Tyniec impressed her greatly, because there were very few churches that could rival it in magnificence. Darkness filled the church, except at the main altar, where many lights were shining, brightening the carvings and gildings. A monk, dressed in a chasuble, came from the vestry, bowed to the princess, and commenced Mass. Then the smoke from the fragrant incense arose, veiled the priest and the altar, and mounted in quiet clouds to the vaulted ceiling, increasing the solemn beauty of the church. Anna Danuta bent her head and prayed fervently. But when an organ, rare in those times, began to shake the nave with majestic thunderings, filling it with angelic voices, then the princess raised her eyes, and her face expressed, beside devotion and fear, a boundless delight. And one looking at her would take her for some saint who sees in a marvelous vision the open heaven. Thus prayed Kieshtut's daughter, who, born in heathenism, in everyday life mentioned God's name just as everybody else did in those times familiarly. But in the Lord's house she used to raise her eyes with fear and humility toward his secret and unmeasurable power. The whole court, although with less humility, prayed devoutly. Zbyszko knelt among the Mazurs and committed himself to God's protection. From time to time he glanced at Danusia, who was sitting beside the princess. He considered it an honor to be the knight of such a girl, and that his vow was not a trifle. He had already girded his sides with a hempen rope, but this was only half of his vow. Now it was necessary to fulfill the other half, which was more difficult. Consequently now, when he was more serious than when in the inn drinking beer, he was anxious to discover how he could fulfill it. There was no war. But amidst the disturbances on the frontier, it was possible to meet some Germans, and either kill them or lay down his own life. He had told this to Mako, but he thought, not every German wears peacock or ostrich feathers on his helmet. Only a few among the guests of the Knights of the Cross are counts, and the Knights of the Cross themselves are only comthers, and not every one of them is a comther either. If there be no war, then years may pass before I shall get those 3 crests. I have not been knighted yet, and can challenge only those who are not knights like myself. It is true I expect to receive the girdle of a knight from the king's hands during the tournaments, which have been announced to take place during the christening. But what will happen then? I will go to Jurand of Spykow. He will help me kill as many Knechts as possible, but that will benefit me little. The Knechts are not knights, with peacock feathers on their heads. Therefore, in his uncertainty, seeing that without God's special favor he could do nothing, he began to pray, Jesus, grant a war between the Knights of the Cross and the Germans who are the foes of this kingdom and of all other nations confessing your holy name. Bless us, but crush them who would rather serve the Starosta of hell than serve you. They have hatred in their hearts against us, being angry because our king and queen, having baptized the Lithuanians, forbade them cut your Christian servants with the sword. For which anger punish them. And I, Zbyszko, a sinner, repent before you and from your 5 wounds beseech for help, that in your mercy you permit me to kill as soon as possible 3 Germans having peacock feathers on their morions. These crests I promised upon my knightly honor to Panna Anna Danuta, Jurand's daughter, and your servant. If I shall find any booty on those defeated Germans, I shall faithfully pay to Holy Church the tithe, in order that you also, sweet Jesus, may have some benefit and glory through me, and also that you may know that I promise to you with a sincere heart. As this is true, so help me. Amen. But as he prayed, his heart softened under the influence of his devotions, and he made another promise, which was that after having redeemed Bogdaniec from its pledge, he would give to the church all the wax which the bees could make during the whole year. He hoped that his uncle Mako would not make any opposition to this, and that the Lord Jesus would be especially pleased with the wax for the candles, and wishing to get it would help him sooner. This thought seemed to him so right that joy filled his soul, and he was almost sure that his prayer would be heard and that the war would soon come so that he could accomplish his vow. He felt such might in his legs and in his arms that at that moment he would have attacked a whole army. He even thought that having increased his promises to God, he would also add for Danusia a couple of Germans. His youthful anger urged him to do it, but this time prudence prevailed, as he was afraid to exhaust God's patience by asking too much. His confidence increased, however, when after Mass and a long rest, he heard the conversation between the abbot and Anna Danuta. The wives of the reigning kings and princes, both on account of devotion as well as on account of the magnificent presents sent them by the master of the order, were very kindly disposed toward the Knights of the Cross. Even the pious Jadwiga, as long as she lived, restrained her husband's anger against them. Anna Danuta alone, having experienced dreadful wrongs from the knights, hated them with her whole soul. Therefore, when the abbot asked her about Mazaush and its affairs, she began to complain bitterly against the order. Our affairs are in a bad condition, and it cannot be otherwise with such neighbors. Apparently it is the time of peace. They exchange ambassadors and letters, but notwithstanding all that, nobody can be sure of anything. The one who lives on the borders of the kingdom never knows when he goes to bed in the evening, whether he will awaken in fetters, or with the blade of a sword in his throat, or with a burning ceiling over his head. Neither oaths, nor seals, nor parchment will protect from treachery. Thus it happened at Zlotoria, where during the time of peace they seized the prince and imprisoned him. The Knights of the Cross said that our castle was a menace to them, But the castles are repaired for defense, not for an onset. And what prince has not the right to build and repair in his own land? Neither the weak nor the powerful can agree with the order, because the knights despise the weak and try to ruin the mighty. Good deeds they repay with evil ones. Is there anywhere in the world another order which has received as many benefits from other kingdoms as the knights have received from Polish princes? And how have they repaid? With threats, with devastation of our lands, with war, and with treachery. And it is useless to complain, even to our apostolic capital, because they do not listen to the Roman Pope himself. Apparently they have sent an embassy now for the Queen's confinement and the expected christening, but only because they wish to appease the anger of this mighty king for the evil deeds they performed in Litwa. But in their hearts they are always plotting means to annihilate this kingdom and the whole Polish nation. The abbot listened attentively with approval and then said, I know that Comther Liechtenstein came to Krakow at the head of the embassy. He is very much respected in the order for his bravery and intelligence. Perhaps you will see him here soon, gracious lady, because he sent me a message yesterday, saying that as he wished to pray to our holy relics, he would pay a visit to Teutonic. Having heard this, the princess began to complain again. The people say, and I am sure rightly, that there will soon be a great war, in which on one side will be the kingdom of Poland and all the nations speaking a language similar to the Polish tongue, and on the other side will be all the Germans and the order. There is a prophecy about this war by some saint. Bridget, interrupted the scholarly abbot, 8 years ago she was canonized. The pious Peter from Alvastra and Matthew from Linkoping have written her revelations, in which a great war has been predicted. Zbyszko shuddered at these words, and not being able to restrain himself, asked, How soon will it be? But the abbot, being occupied with the princess, did not hear, or probably did not wish to hear, the question. The princess spoke further. Our young knights are glad that this war is coming, but the older and prudent ones speak thus. We are not afraid of the Germans, although their pride and power are great, but we are afraid of their relics, because against those all human might is powerless. Here Anna Danuta looked at the abbot with fear and added in a softer voice, They say they have a true piece of the Holy Cross. How then can one fight against them? The French king sent it to them, answered the abbot. There was a moment of silence. Then Mikolai of Dlugolas, called Obuch, a man of great experience, said, I was in captivity among the Knights of the Cross. I saw a procession in which they carried this great relic. But beside this, there are many other relics in the monastery in Oliva, without which the order would not have acquired such power. The Benedictines stretched their necks toward the speaker, and began to ask with great curiosity, Tell us, what are they? There is a piece of the dress of the Most Holy Virgin, answered the Lodica of Dlugolas. There is a molar tooth of Maria from Magdala, and branches from the bush in which God the Father revealed himself to Moses. There is a hand of Saint Lyburgus, and as for the bones of other saints, I cannot count them on the fingers of both hands and the toes of both feet. How can one fight them? Repeated the princess, sighing. The abbot frowned, and having thought for a while, said, It is difficult to fight them, for this reason. They are monks, and they wear the cross on their mantles, but if they have exceeded the measure of their sins, then even those relics will refuse to remain with them. In that case, they will not strengthen the knights, but will take their strength away, so that the relics can pass into more pious hands. May God spare Christian blood, but, if a great war should come, there are some relics in our kingdom also, which will succor us. May God help us, exclaimed Zbyszko. The abbot turned toward the princess and said, Therefore have confidence in God, gracious lady, because their days are numbered rather than yours. In the meanwhile, accept with grateful heart this box, in which there is a finger of Saint Ptolemaeus, one of our patrons. The princess extended her hand and, kneeling, accepted the box, which she immediately pressed to her lips. The courtiers shared the joy of the lady. Zbyszko was happy because it seemed to him that war would come immediately after the Krakowian festivals.
Remember to subscribe.